we all good? Almost tore everything off. Good morning, Threshers. Good morning. Welcome to Convocation. It's a real honor to introduce our speaker this morning, Sara Wingershink, who's the President Emerita of the Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary. Back in 2018, when I started here as president at Bethel College, I met Sara for the first time when the group of us, Mennonite presidents, there are 6 of us, convened. We were all relatively new to our positions, all except Sara, who had already been the president at AMBS for about 8 years. Her experience and her understanding of the leadership world was readily apparent to all of us, and it was extensive and valuable as well. I was always reassured by her presence and shared with her on one occasion a challenging leadership scenario that I was facing. And thank you, Sara, for your kind advice and wisdom. I bought a book as a result of our conversation, which in my world means a lot. With time, and as the Mennonite presidents got to know each other, I learned why Sara was such a font of comfort and an excellent leader. First of all, she writes a lot. By my count, she has published 9 books, her first all the way back in the 1980s. Her books cover a range of topics, an impressive range, from parenthood and teaching and Anabaptist educational theory to her most current contribution, a book entitled Tongue-Tied, The Lost Art of Talking About Faith. This most recent book in Sara's extensive experience is one of the reasons she's here today, to build on and contribute to our theme of faith formation during the fall 2021 convocation semester. It helps to be able to talk about faith, especially in a polarized world, if we are to make any progress on the formation part. There is also the matter that Sara has preached a lot, hundreds of sermons, and I hope I'm getting that in the ballpark. I don't know if that's what we're receiving today, but I can imagine you'll be able to hear certain elements of sermons and what she has to say. Third, all this expertise and wisdom that Sara has and that you're about to benefit from comes from a diverse and enriching educational experience. She received her BA in English education from Eastern Mennonite University in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and then went on to Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, where she studied for a short period of time, and then took an interesting diversion and went to the University of Zagreb in Croatia to do studies on the Croatian language for a couple of years before returning to get her MTS from Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary in Evanston, Illinois. She followed that with a doctorate in education from Union Theological Seminary and the Presbyterian School of Christian Education in Richmond, Virginia. I could go on here, but I think you start to see the point. Sara has received many awards and honors during her professional career, but is now coming out of retirement to be here today to share with us that message of faith formation and how to talk to each other about faith. So please help me give a warm Thresher welcome to Sara Wingershink.
Thank you, President Gearing. Wow, after all that buildup. Yeah, I have had a life rich with many experiences, and am so grateful to have this opportunity to share with you some of what I have learned about faith conversation, talk about faith, who we are in the ordinariness of our everyday lives in the presence of God. It's wonderful to be here with you. The last time I was here was for the inauguration of President Gearing, and it's such a gorgeous day on your beautiful college campus. I had a conversation with a friend a while ago in which he made this observation. He said, you know, there are a lot of things we talk about easily, like sports, the latest movies we've seen, our favorite restaurants, perhaps politics. Many things we readily converse with when we're with friends around our tables at home. But, he said, I don't often hear people talking about faith, except at church. Why is that? He wondered. And my curiosity was immediately hooked, and it took me into this book writing project, Tongue-Tied, Learning the Lost Art of Talking About Faith. Why is it we find talking about faith difficult? Now, it's true not everyone does. Some of us readily and easily talk about faith, but for many of us, it is a challenging topic to go there. So, I invite you to reflect on sort of your own practice. Do you talk about faith, and with whom, in what settings? Perhaps the question that lies behind that is, do you have faith? Do you consider yourself a person of faith? And the question even behind that one is, what is faith? What is faith? So, several stories to sort of illustrate what I'm talking about. A couple months ago, I was invited to an interview with a popular Irish Catholic host of The God Show, believe it or not. The God Show, it's a radio and internet talk show based in Arizona and followed around the world. The host said when he read the subtitle of my book, Learning the Lost Art of Talking About Faith, he knew it was exactly what they were looking for on their show. We had a delightful hour-long conversation. There are 3 topics it's considered very impolite to talk about at the dinner table, he said. Politics, sex, and religion. At my house, he said, if we start talking about religion, it turns into a pie fight. It's just not cool to talk about religion, he said. It brings out so much anger and argument about who's right and who's wrong that it's just easier to avoid talking about religion and faith altogether. I imagine many of you can think of places where conversation about faith was rather tense, turned into an argument, and so we tend to avoid it. Another story. A news reporter interviewing an Amish man asked whether he was a Christian. And the Amish man paused and then, rather than answering directly, pointed to his neighbor's house and said, "The answer to your question can be found by asking my neighbor." In other words, the real evidence of faith is how we live. So, why do we need to talk about it? Be a good person. That's what it's all about. I hear this a lot. Why is it important that we talk about faith? Another perspective. From Michael Roth, president of Wesleyan University, who talked about how threatening it feels for students who are persons of faith to be outed in the classroom. Their experience, he said, has taught them that if they're known as people of faith, they'll be regarded as intellectually deficient or morally compromised. Now, that's not likely the way you find it here at Bethel College, but it is, apparently, at Wesleyan University and at many universities. This is disappointing, President Roth says, because students seem to check their faith at the door rather than feeling free to honestly wrestle with questions of love and judgment, justice and violence, grace and forgiveness. While there are historical dimensions to what these words have meant to people, say in the civil rights movement, in the abolitionist movement, peace movement, there are also ways in which love, justice, grace, and forgiveness are immensely important to students' lives right now. And to their ability to engage with what sustains work for justice, for example. So what do we hear in these stories? What do we hear? Now, I see a variety of you out there watching your phones. I wonder if you're tuning in to conversations about faith. I bet you're not. But maybe you are. Maybe you are. Talking about, when we think about talking about faith, we talk about what has our focus, what has our attention, what we are watching, what we are paying attention to. It may be that conversations of faith have turned into, if not a pie fight, a standoff, an argument, and so we tend not to go there. It may be that we really don't think conversations about faith are all that important. In fact, the way we live is important, so why should we bring to voice what we experience about God? It may be that we tend to check faith at the door. What is faith? What is faith? How I think of faith often is a kind of aliveness to the Spirit of God, to a reality beyond what we can see and hear. An aliveness, a watching, an attentiveness. Where is God going to show up in the course of an ordinary day? Faith is about learning to trust that one is loved and that one can love in return, offer love in return. Faith is about believing that we are called to serve God no matter where we are, as a scientist, as a community organizer, a father, mother, doctor, teacher, carpenter, farmer, parent, business leader. So what makes it hard? Well, like I said, we tend to talk about what we're excited about, what we're watching for, where our attention is focused. And many of us are focused on what excites us, what energizes us. In other words, we're not going to be talking about faith if we're not energized by an awareness of where real power lies, of the source of real power to make a difference in our lives, to make a difference in our world. If we're not expecting that, we're not going to be watching for it or talking about it. Some of us find it hard to talk about faith because we don't like the faith talk we've heard. It sounds too glib. It sounds out of touch with the real moral issues of our day, like sexism, poverty, climate change, racism. Some of us find it hard to talk about faith because God is mysterious, incomprehensible, beyond understanding. So who are we as mere human beings to talk about something that is unfathomable? Or perhaps faith is really so personal for us, we don't find it easy to bring it to voice. Or maybe we have heard faith language weaponized, politicized, by people promoting a nationalistic, white-dominated faith people who speak hatefully about others who aren't part of their tribe. Or perhaps faith language is not something we choose to use because it's often been used to make us feel unworthy because of our gender, our ethnicity, our sexuality. Faith talk has been hurtful and hypocritical, so we want nothing to do with it. Or perhaps we just haven't seen it modeled very well. We haven't heard it done in ways that are trustworthy, reliable, embodied, and honest. Think for a moment, all of you. Think for a moment. And then turn to your neighbor. What is it, if you find it difficult to talk about faith? What are the reasons? What is it that's tying up your tongue? Just take a moment to think about that. And then perhaps say to your neighbor, well, this is what makes it tough for me. Or it's not tough, I find it pretty easy. Okay, who's willing to sort of call out what makes it tough? What are the hurdles? Just in a word or a couple words. What makes it tough? Big silence. Not knowing if the other person is even interested in talking about it. Yeah. A lot of people make faith is a private thing. Yeah. Something we do in private. Mystery. Faith is kind of a loaded topic. We don't want to offend each other. We don't want to be in people's face. We don't want to appear to be bragging like I have a special connection with God, that I want you to know about how special I am. There's a lot of challenge in doing this well. The reality is, however, Christian faith can't exist without words, because someone spoke to someone, to someone, to someone, to someone about God. The language of faith, like any language out there, and provides the glue that binds a community together. Speech, talk about faith, and community go hand in hand. And the way we talk about faith has everything to do with whether we build up community and have a healthy, vibrant community life, or whether we destroy community. And there are words. Just think about each of these words as if you have one of your favorite candies on your tongue. Savor it. Think about these sacred words like mercy, trust, peace, justice, wisdom, sin, evil, confession, forgiveness, truthfulness, and prayer. These words are like vessels carrying precious content. They're carrying something that gets passed along with the word. And if we're not using these words, we also lose that precious content that the vessel of the word carries. Mercy. If we're not talking about mercy, we won't have eyes and ears to understand what it means to give and receive mercy. If we're not talking about justice, we won't have eyes and ears to understand what justice means and why it matters. If we don't use forgiveness and talk about what it means to be truthful, what these words convey, the reality they convey, will be lost to us. Can you imagine the impoverishment? So how might we do better? Well, here are some ways I suggest. To speak about faith truthfully, we must always first listen. Listen for the still small voice of the Spirit. What does that mean? That's the way we talk about faith, but what does it mean to listen for the still small voice of the Spirit? In the scriptures, yes, but also in the birds and the trees, the rivers and the oceans crying out. Listen to the voices that say Black Lives Matter. By listening first, we learn to pay attention to how God is present everywhere and in everyone. Listen. Learn to submit to the mystery of it all. Who are we to presume to know God or what God thinks or says? Somehow, in acknowledging, I don't know a whole lot about God, but this is what I have come to believe. This is my story. There is a kind of humility that lets me stay open for how you have experienced God and to learn from you. And perhaps most importantly, faith is like falling in love. Now, I imagine many of you in this room have had experiences of falling in love with someone, or perhaps falling in love with, a sport, or a wonderful book that has changed your life. When you fall in love, it is hard to keep quiet. And if faith at its root is about a love attachment that makes all the difference in how we see and experience the world, it's, we're going to talk about it. We're going to want to write poetry. We want to perhaps compose a song, paint a picture, communicate what we have experienced, what we have fallen in love with, the love we have received and offered in return. So what can free our tongues to talk about faith? Well, curiosity. Curiosity is the oxygen in any room that has come alive with conversations about faith. It is because the oxygen of curiosity is there, welcoming big questions. We don't need to be expert Bible scholars or theologians. We are called to be honest seekers with a healthy curiosity about the nature of things, creating hospitable spaces for asking the big questions. It is the questions that break open assumptions. It is the questions that create energy and intrigue. In what other ways are our tongues freed to talk about faith? Well, the climate crisis becomes a wide open door to talk about faith, because faith isn't just something personal. It's not something only private to me and you. Faith talk is about seeking the shalom of all of God's creation. Every creature speaks of God Every creature speaks a divine word. And as we recognize God in everyone and in everything, we come alive to the presence of God in our world and alive to what it means to acknowledge God animating the world in ways that are quickening for us. In what ways are our tongues freed to speak freely about faith? I talk in the book about how science and faith sing in harmony. Because I am a person of faith, or you are a person of faith, doesn't in any way mean that we're intellectually deficient, as was mentioned earlier. Fluency in faith blossoms when we bring faith and science into conversation with each other. It's hard to imagine a more generative fuel for talk about faith than when we explore what it means to hold matter and spirit together as part of an indivisible whole. Or to think of science as a gift from the Creator. Or by holding science and faith together, we experience more ways of knowing and perceiving reality than if we're seeing only from the perspective of our own sensory apparatus. Discovering ways to talk about faith is to recover a renewed relationship with the Scriptures, the richly layered beauty of the Bible. My childhood home, my mother and father, passed on their love for the Bible. They never seemed uptight about getting it just right or anxious about forcing down a correct way to take it in. Rather, it was like honey on the tongue, water for the thirsty, bread for the hungry, effervescent joy in the morning. I learned growing up, and I imagine many of you did too, inasmuch as you are here at Bethel College, is that good education and the way teachers and professors in love with the music of the Scriptures light our imaginations. Wonderful teachers, pastors, friends who love the Scriptures make it like a treasure hunt and give us the wellspring of vocabulary and stories that free our tongues to talk about faith. And worship and prayer free our tongues to talk about faith. Are you a person who prays? Or do you say prayer feels artificial? I can't go. I'm not a praying person. I don't know how to pray. I don't believe in prayer. I hear it over and over again. No one taught me to pray. They taught me how to play football, basketball. They taught me how to become a nurse, taught me how to be a teacher, a computer scientist, a graphic designer, but no one taught me how to pray. Without prayer and participating in a worshiping community, faith talk is like an amputated body part. At their heart, prayer and worship aren't about doing something extra. Okay, we're going to be super religious today. We're going to pray, folks. Prayer is not about doing something extra to be more religious, but it is woven into what it means to be fully human. If we are indeed created by a God who wants a relationship with us, who made us, and with whom, if we are truly going to flourish and enjoy a life that is good, if that is the case, then learning how to listen and respond and come alive to that God in prayer will be the energy, the power that animates at least a curiosity about faith. if not a whole lot of conversation or talk about faith. And that's where it all starts. If we're going to flourish as human beings, and if all creation is going to flourish, what the scriptures describe as shalom. Shalom, this beautiful wholeness where all of God's creatures are in harmony with each other. Oh, how we are desperately in need of shalom for our beleaguered world that is so polarized, so divided, where hate talk is far more prevalent than peacemakers out there speaking words of shalom, showing how if we are going to live together in harmony, if we are going to manage to bring this world back from the brink of climate disaster, if we are going to learn to live and thrive as human beings, then we must rediscover the relationship with the Creator who set this all into motion and discover the source of real power. I learned a Bible verse when I was growing up that the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. I haven't often heard that talked about in this day because who wants to fear the Lord? We all want to do away with any images we might have of God that are frightening, harsh God. But what I have learned is that the fear of the Lord is all about knowing where real power lies, where real power lies. So, the fear of the Lord is to understand the sort of awesome, yes, incomprehensibility of this God who set a world in motion perhaps 4.5 billion years ago. The complexity of life forms that we enjoy, and who today, here, wants you to recognize where real power lies, to watch for it to show up in the everydayness of your lives, to pay attention. How is God present? How is God there in ways that I can call on when I am overcome with fear? How does God give me the courage to take risks, to go there, to practice in the hospital, on the front line with COVID patients, to be out in the streets demonstrating on behalf of beleaguered people, declaring that Black Lives Matter, speaking out against police brutality. These are all interrelated, and when we understand where real power lies, we become wise in ways that we want to share with each other what I have seen and heard of God at work in my life, in the lives of those around me, giving me courage, giving me new hope, helping me get out of bed in the morning, helping me go do what will make a difference in the world. So my hope is that we will rediscover faith like a love story, like a love attachment that we can't keep quiet about, and that we will come to see how our own personal stories, our own personal anxieties, our own personal dreams connect with the cosmic story of the God who so loved the world. That God created this beautiful universe, and that we are here with the freedom, the ability to connect with this God and share out of the love of that connection, a love for life in every direction we move and in every conversation that somehow comes alive, empowered by that love. May it be so for all of us here. Now, I understand there is conversation welcome, some questions that President Gehring will come and invite.
Thank you, Sara. So Sara has left the door wide open in the way that she's talked about and presented, talking about faith. So at this time, there's a microphone right there. Please ask questions.
So when talking about science and faith, a common point that gets brought up is this idea of the God of the gaps, where we can't explain X, therefore God. How would you recommend discussing topics around that question? Because for some it might feel like kind of a cop-out, like, science can't necessarily explain this, so therefore God. How would you suggest talking about those issues?
Could you hear that?
I could. It's about the God of the gaps. That faith is sort of what fills in those gaps, what science can't explain. What I have read, and I'm not a scientist, but I get rather eager about quantum physics, things I've read and so on. And, I think religion, faith, and science kind of both went through these periods where they were pretty certain they could provide all the answers. Religion said, we've got the answers. Science came along and said, hey, we see things differently now. We've got the answers. There's a great deal of uncertainty now, called the age of uncertainty, in both faith and science. We are both discovering new capacities, new possibilities. There is no way we cancel each other out. Science can be a form of worship because it keeps opening our eyes to more and more of the complexity of the world that was set into motion. And as Francis Collins and some others would say, the director of NIH, there is 4.5 billion years ago, this scientists, pretty much a lot of them agree, the Big Bang. Well, what set that off? I mean, there are questions that science cannot answer and are not meant to answer. There are multiple ways of knowing. Science assumes a certain kind of knowing. Religion serves other kinds of knowing. Together, it increases our spectrum of the ways we know. We are not simply bound to certain ways of knowing. There are, if we're not praying, for example, we will not be perceiving things that can be known by faith. And if we're not doing experiments according to the scientific method, there are things we won't know or see. So a rich array of ways of knowing are available to us when we hold together, whether it's faith or indigenous wisdom with science. We have a larger spectrum of ways we can apprehend our world. Yes, thank you for that question.
What are your thoughts of how, the two areas of science and faith don't always mix? Like, some people might be very experienced in the science field, but yet very untrustworthy of faith, while others might have strong faith, but not trust science as much. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
So it's people in both, people of faith and people of science who don't trust the way others perceive. Scientists not trusting people of faith not trusting science. How do we get beyond that divide? Is that Yeah, yeah. Well, I would think, yeah. There is I think it was Jesuit philosopher Teilhard de Chardin said, more and more I have come to understand research as a way of worshiping, trying to discover the things that in this magnificent world that unlock our understanding of this world, evoke, and when we do discover things like, discover amazing things about our genetic makeup and so on, it evokes wonder. One of the ways to bridge is to go there. What evokes wonder for you? What is it that you are in awe about if you're a person of faith? If you're walking this, the Sand Creek Trail. What evokes wonder for you? How can science be perceived as helping us understand some of what's there and even the greater complexity of what's there? It increases our wonder. It opens our eyes more. And scientists, people of faith, many of them are functioning with blinders on. Many of them are intimidated about what science says about the age of the world. That is lamentable. That is to grieve when we could come together and appreciate the gifts of the one and the other. There is so much fear, so much anxiety. We feel threatened in our assumption about what the Bible says. We feel threatened in our, if the world is not flat, for instance. These are age-old battles. And what you, as people from Bethel College, can do is to say, we don't need to be at odds here. If we're going to use a biblical image, there are different members of the body all working together. You have the gift of science. You have the gift of art. You have the gift of athletic prowess. This all comes together into a beautiful whole when we appreciate what we each bring together in wonder on an adventure of discovery to learn who is this that transcends our reality but somehow also intervenes, brings power to bear to make a difference. That's a huge topic. Thank you. Another question?
So you spoke a little bit, thank you for speaking. You spoke a little bit about like the language of faith and like the language, and we got an email before kind of giving a little bit of information about the convocation. And one of the quotes from it is, "We need a language of faith that is authentic, candid, and robust enough to last."
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about that aspect of things.
A language of faith that is authentic, robust, candid, enough to last. Thank you. That's a great question. I think the language of faith has often been used to create a virtual reality. It's like there's a kind of Christianese, a code speak that you're supposed to use when you talk about faith. And much of faith, like faith has been used to sort of shore up literalist interpretations of the Bible, like the earth is 6,000 years old, whatever it is. It creates this virtual reality that is disconnected from real life, from the way we live our lives, from embodied existence. So faith, big part of the book I talked about, it is just getting in touch with our own humanity, being real in our bodies, learning to talk in ways that are vulnerable, yes, about our own sense of lostness, our disconnect from God, our fears about the future, whatever it is, getting real with each other in ways that are authentic, candid, vulnerable, if you will, that is then where we can have honest conversation. Hopefully in classes here, and I'm sure it's happening, you create this safe space. I call it brave space, where people can bring their real selves, their real questions, into that conversation. And instead of using the Christianese or the code language or imagining talking about faith is something that is sort of artificially brought in. No, it is about saying, well, this is my understanding of God. This is the story that speaks to me of what salvation means. This is how I have experienced forgiveness. This is my story. And then it becomes something that is contagious in a good way, because you being real will help the next person to be real, and the next person, and the next person. And that is where we discover this love connection, love for God and love for all creation in a way that we can become leaders, servants of shalom.
Thank you, Sara. After a hearty round of applause, and also noting that if you want to meet Sara, you can come up here and talk with her. After a round of applause, you're dismissed. Thank you.
You're welcome.